Hello, my name is Caleb Smith with the Rocket Miner newspaper, here to provide your news update for August 2nd, 2020. I want to talk a little bit about doom scrolling today, the practice where people obsessively consume negative news to the point where they're kind of doing some harm to themselves. This is not a new phenomenon, but it is something that seems like it's easier to do than ever before, and also pronounced by the stress and fallout of what we're seeing lately in the news, particularly with the coronavirus pandemic. But before we get into that, I want to hit some of the top headlines for the day. The Wyoming Department of Health is reporting that statewide we're up to 2,333 lab confirmed cases, 475 probable cases, and our death toll sits at 26 people who have had COVID-19 related deaths. In America, Johns Hopkins University is reporting that total cases are now at 4,662,860. The death toll sits at 154,834 people. And recoveries are now up to 1,468,689 people. Overall, our global total is now at 17,960,538 people. Global death toll is 687,067 people. And recoveries are now at 10,634,393 people. Looking ahead to the end of the week, organizers of the annual Sturgis Motorcycle Rally are expecting about 250,000 people. The event is scheduled to run August 7th through 16th. Unofficially, it looks like it's probably going to be the biggest national event that's occurred in the last couple of months. Swelling the small town of Sturgis, which is normally about 7,000 people, to a much greater number. One thing to keep an eye on is that both the organizers, people in the community, and outsiders are curious how things will go in the age of the coronavirus. Hopeful that people act responsibly and have a good time. Elsewhere in the news, where there's a little bit more water, the SpaceX capsule and NASA crew made their first splashdown in 45 years, for quite some time now. When astronauts have been returning from space, they've primarily been doing so by parachute, primarily in Russia, especially from the space station the last couple of years. But they made a kind of throwback return with a splashdown in the Gulf of Mexico in a capsule that was built by a private company, but still included both members of the SpaceX crew and NASA. Also in the news, I'm sorry to note that Wilford Brimley, actor, has died at age 85. He's had a great impact on the popular culture. It's always interesting to see where people know him as, whether it's from Cocoon, The Natural, maybe you know him as the Quaker Oats spokesman, or maybe you just are one of those people who best know him from those commercials talking about diabetes. If you have the chance, check out some of his stuff. I always enjoyed what he put up on screen. Now let's talk about doom scrolling, or in some cases it's known as doom surfing. I read an article that traced its origins back to 2018, but I'm seeing it pop up more and more online and starting to see it pop up in headlines. I combed what you're going to see me talking about is primarily pulled from multiple sources, ranging from Philadelphia News Radio to actually the Middle East to more closer to home places like New York Times, Men's Health magazine. But let's start with some definitions. According to Merriam-Webster, doom scrolling and doom surfing are new terms referring to the tendency to continue to surf or scroll through bad news, even though that news is saddening, disheartening, or depressing. I also sometimes turn to the website Urban Dictionary, which is a good source to see how terms are being used online by younger people. It can get a little bit filthy sometimes, but it can also be extremely direct. The top definition they have is obsessively reading social media posts about how utterly, I'm going to substitute the word screwed we are. And it also, like any good dictionary, includes some uses, as in, I've got to stop doom scrolling about COVID-19. It's making me depressed. Or, my life has been so much better since I quit doom scrolling all the time. Now, it's important to make a difference between reading to be informed or entertained, or spending time online connecting with good friends or family, and binging on doom and gloom news. Well, just because this isn't necessarily based on the amount of time that you're spending ingesting news and updates and posts. It's more referring to the type and what it's doing to your head and your heart. KYW News Radio interviewed Dr. Melissa Hunt, a clinical psychologist and associate director of clinical training at the University of Pennsylvania. She said, depending on people's habits, a person's mood can vary when using social media, particularly in how you're using the information that you're directing into yourself. She makes a distinction between adaptive, which often helps people feel more connected, or maladaptive, which is often where people are kind of ending up feeling terrible. She said you should be looking at how are you engaged? How are you connecting? She said there's a difference between following friends, family, which is a practice that often makes people feel less lonely, less depressed. Those who do so often feel more supported in general. And then there's sometimes where you're just reading more stark headlines or shock news, or you're following people that you don't really know them, they don't really know you. It might just be a one-sided relationship. Kardashians kind of come to mind, but there are certainly many others. And if you're just using social media passively and following strangers, it's more often where you're not gonna be having those positive effects we previously talked about. You're more apt to kind of end that session feeling a little bit mucky. Turning to another source, Men's Health magazine talked to Dr. Paul L. Hochmeyer. I apologize, doctor, if I got your name wrong. I am probably going to get it wrong again shortly. But he's an addiction specialist and author, and he believes that doom scrolling includes many of the same hallmarks as other forms of digital addiction. Quote, it seems illogical in that people would consume massive amounts of negative media to help them deal with feeling overloaded by all the negativity swirling in the world. But such is the nature of an addictive disorder, he says. Quote, and doom scrolling is very much an addictive disorder. It comes into being not through logic, but through primal drives that originate in the most primitive parts of our brain, known as the limbic system. Going back to Dr. Hunt, she kind of has multiple questions that she encourages people kind of use as a diagnostic. Something to consider is, are you spending more time surfing or scrolling than intended? She suggests about an hour a day. And if you're planning on spending an hour and you spend a lot more than that, red flag. And something else she says that people should look at is to ask, how do you feel at the end? Are you, do you feel better about and more equipped to handle the day, or do you feel impaired? And of course, as a general note, a lot more of the headlines are trending a little bit more downward lately. It's still important to find happy, uplifting stories in there. That's why I tried to have a mix of both in our story wrap up and in our physical edition as well. But there's a level between knowing what the big headlines are and spending a lot more time just gets fixating on them. And that's a cycle that you need to break. That's something that doesn't lead anywhere good. Dr. Hochmeyer um, has some advice on how to quit, and I'm actually pulling from once again pulling from many sources. But he specifically says relief comes from recognizing the emotional triggers that precedes doom scrolling and identifying the ritualistic behaviors surrounding their compulsive media use. Successful recovery depends on creating reparative interventions at both points of this addictive cycle. And the magazine kind of puts a paraphrase translation following that. In other words, people must recognize when they're falling into those depths of despair and create healthier ways of coping. And a lot of these things that are going to follow are the standard steps for dealing with addiction. You need to recognize it. You need to figure out ways to interrupt cycles. You need to ask for help when you can. And honestly, some of these are more simple than others. It's take a breath, count to 10, take a break, walk away. Look for ways to connect with others. Sometimes just even talking about, I'm just feeling down today, with a trusted friend, a confidant, someone that you can shoot the breeze with. That will do a lot. One of the things that's sometimes you need to take it an extra step than that, more than just talking. Give your mobile device to a trusted friend. Limit your online use. So you might use a timer. You might buy, there are programs out there, free and paid, that limit how much time you can spend on certain sites, if not the internet itself. You may need to physically move the computer to an inconvenient part of the home. You may need to stop sleeping with your phone. Now, I'd like that the writer of this particular article anticipated an objection that I and others would have, but my phone's my alarm clock. And I'm less likely to destroy my alarm if it's a phone, that costs me a few $100s as opposed to another alarm clock. Well, you need more impulse control. And this person says, instead of spending the first part of your morning or while you're still in bed or the end of your day while you're climbing into bed, instead of spending that on the phone, keep your phone separate. Buy a cheapo alarm clock. You can find a really ritzy model for $12.95. Amongst other, it's do with that information what you will. There are also other bits. Instead of being glued to a screen, take a stroll around the block. Hop on an exercise bike. Hop on a real bike. Prepare your favorite snack. And it even suggests maybe you even schedule your breaks. Put them on the calendar. Have an alarm set. And also suggests consider where you're getting your information. One site said, instead of getting your daily info fix from outrage-driven algorithms of social media, try switching to newsletters or newspapers. And as part of that, build a good bank of sources to receive news from and cut down on the time you spend on other websites. If you know you get riled up to an unhealthy degree, if you're always going on X site, limit time spent there. And as a final step, there's a lot of places where people are getting cranked up to a degree that's unhealthy on stuff they can't control. You can get a lot of tension built up by reading some headlines or spending time in the comment section. I do this professionally. I stare into the abyss on a regular basis, and while I think I have a higher than average tolerance level, I myself have to take a break from time to time. And one of the coping mechanisms that I turn to when I can, and I'd encourage others, is that sometimes try to look for places where you can make a difference. And that might be, you might be looking for self-improvement, do more exercise, do more reading, educate yourself in other areas. You may also look for how you can benefit the community, look for opportunities to volunteer. No one person can change the world, but we can do our best to make a positive influence on this immediate sphere. Roughly the how far your voice can carry. And there's a tipping point where, yes, I think a person should know what's going on around them, but there's the point where if you've become immobilized by your actions, by your ingesting of all this, you've taken it a degree too far. We need to be prepared. We need to be on guard against our stuff, but it doesn't do anybody any good if we're rendered inert by our media content. That stops, like I said, that's no longer about being educated. That's no longer about being educated or entertained. We got to take care of ourselves, and we should be looking to take care of others. Even just doing the research for this, I'm reminded about how areas where I can do better, particularly when it comes to asking outsiders for help, or sometimes taking a break and making that phone call you've been meaning to make for a while, catching up with that person, sending a text message if that's how they prefer. Social media, particularly in addition to just our interconnected world, makes some of these negative habits easier than ever before. But they're just a tool. And while they may heighten the recent stuff, this is a long-term thing. We all know people, sometimes for a long time, who their cup's always half empty. That's, things are bad and they're probably going to get worse. We know that, most of us know that we kind of generally limit our interactions with those people, or we know to take them with a grain of salt. And sometimes you just have to walk away. And in the same way we do that with physical people, we got to do that with these physical machines that we're engaging with and have become an omnipresent part of our lives. Some of it's we got to take better care of our brain. We got to take better care of our hearts. We got to take better care of each other. And just know when to just stop scrolling, when to hit the power button, and just leave it alone. So that's the word from the Rocket Miner today. And I'm Caleb Smith, wishing you a good day and a safe tomorrow. Bye.